Okay. I thought we'll start with some music, Chris.
Yeah, it's good.
I claim to be this person, not selfish, not greedy. Well, that's not me.
I always use music as a way to center myself.
Exactly.
For someone, not me.
So welcome everybody to Stillness and Chaos. I've got Chris Underhill, an amazing friend, mentor, guide, beautiful human being. And we've got a special episode today. We've called it Design Your Life, Build a Legacy. And I'm really excited for this. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Daniel. I'm the founder of Because You. And I truly believe that all of us are wise, creative, joyful human beings. And sometimes, having a mental health issue, emotional distress, grief, whatever it is, kind of clouds who we are as human beings. So it's my life's purpose to kind of firstly work on myself to see my own, see my own humanness, but also work with others to kind of see who they are as human beings. So Stillness and Chaos is one of the ways that I'm doing this. I get awesome guests like Chris every couple of weeks, and we talk about lots of stuff under the sun. And it's meant to be, fun, vulnerable, meaningful conversations. So, Chris, maybe I can just start with a very quick intro, if that's possible to do in 3 minutes, because you've achieved a lot. But so you are a maverick, firstly, because in 1978 you started Thrive, which was ahead of its time in many ways, using gardening, horticulture to really work with differently able people as a therapeutic tool. And now we kind of know the benefit, but back then, you were one of the first to do it, and it's incredible that you did that. After that, you've started many organizations, some of which action disability and development, Basic Needs, which was an incredible community mental health organization. The model has been now taken to different countries, impacting hundreds and thousands of people. And at the moment, you're the CEO. If you've not done enough with your life at the age of 75, you're now the CEO of the Elders Council for Social Entrepreneurs. That's really looking at supporting young social entrepreneurs, really taking the wisdom of people who've been there, done that, and kind of transferring it to some of us who are doing it now. You've also, along the way, you've kind of picked up a few awards like the Schwab Award, the Skoll Award, and lots of other things. So you are a maverick, firstly.
Have we finished now? Can I go?
No. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit more. Second, you are a mentor par excellence. I think there are so many of us who've been mentored by you. The way you kind of listen with wisdom, just your presence, both from an inner leadership as well as a strategic way, has really helped many of us kind of, build our organizations, take, what we have, the idea, and just implement it. So, I can easily say you're one of the best mentors out there. I know you're a professional mentor right now, and you're doing this for many people. But that's the second thing that comes to mind. And the third, but most important, is you're just a beautiful human being. Right? I think I had the pleasure of calling you a friend for over 13 years or so, and I've seen you, balance just deep wisdom with lots of goofiness, lots of immense love and care with everyone that you work with and interact with. And the most beautiful thing is people feel seen in your presence, and I think that's a real gift. So thank you for who you are, all these three things, and welcome to Stillness and Chaos.
Thank you very much, Daniel. What a lovely introduction. I certainly wouldn't call myself beautiful. But
it's the inside, Chris. It's not about the outside. I agree that the outside may not be so good.
Yeah, but I'm very happy to be with you and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So, people are here. We have no idea if anyone's watching. So if you are watching, please say something. Ask a question, share comments, reflections. I can put up your comments like this, whether you're joining in from LinkedIn or from YouTube. So feel free to ask questions as we speak. Otherwise, Chris and I are just happy to just go on speaking. So Chris, this episode, you were very keen about this because you've just turned 75. You're thinking very intentionally about your life ahead, and there are so many other things, right? Whether you're the secret sauce of mentorship, how you built organizations. So there'll be lots of things that we'll cover, but we'll kind of keep this as the central theme. But perhaps before that, just to get to know you a little bit more, you're clearly a complex, multi-layered individual. And I'd love to just ask you, who or what has shaped you? Maybe one or two pivotal moments, people in your life.
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. I think it's probably true to say that in my first about 13, 14 years of life, I had quite a tough life in some ways. Brought up by three amazing people. My father, mother, and then my stepfather. The men were both, essentially, they were all Australians, and they came here just after the war, basically. My father was an artist, and he still, that was his job. That's what he did. That's what he lived for, to paint. And my mother was a writer. And they were very preoccupied with their art, and small children, whilst loved, no doubt about that, sort of got in the way of it a bit. And in fact, there's an interesting story. When my mum was coming over on the ship, in those days they didn't fly, they sailed. So flying, she was sailing from Australia to the UK. She went to the doctor and said, I haven't had my period for a long time. This is on the ship. And he said, oh, don't worry, my dear. He had a big pipe. He said, don't worry, my dear. That's just the tropics. And then they got to the UK and they started to meet other artists and people in art. And she still wasn't, she was a young woman, so she didn't have a period. Well, strange. And so went to another doctor, and the doctor said, he was again puffing a pipe. It seemed to be a kind of theme. He said, well, it's obvious, madam, you're pregnant. And so, and apparently I was around 6 months at that time. So the fact of the matter is that I was born into, your whole program is called Stillness and Chaos. And I want to refer back to that because I think the first 15 or 12 years of my life were probably the most chaotic in many ways. Deeply loved, but often quite lost. We didn't have a house much, for example. We moved from place to place, studio to studio, and so on. So there's no question that formed me to quite an important degree. And the other thing that really formed me was eventually, Shirley, my mother, was able to find a school for me in the UK because they were living mostly in the Mediterranean. And the school was a progressive school called Dartington Hall. And that in itself was a fantastic place because it allowed you to develop your own will. So it basically, its mantra was, the question, who are you? A bit like the question you've asked me. And how are you going to develop? And, if you made a mistake, you weren't beaten or anything like that. It wasn't that kind of place at all. But if you made a mistake, that was on you. And so how are you going to sort it out? And you were supported in doing that. But along in that period came a young woman called Giselle. And she is my wife today. So we've been married for 55 years, come August. And of course, if you include the time that we were boyfriend and girlfriend, it's even longer. And that to me is a very important pivotal moment, shaped me enormously. over the years.
Say more about so first 13 years chaos, your school kind of put up these questions, which is where you started to maybe ponder on who you are and Giselle. And I know she's such a important, integral part of your life. So, say more about her, because I think
Sure. No, I'd be happy to. I mean, a boarding school is, when people think of boarding school, they don't necessarily think of co-ed, a co-educational school. But that's what it was. And it was an experiment in education in many ways, which was, for me, very successful, because it was able to take in a child who had quite a disruptive time, quite a difficult time in some periods of that childhood. And it was able to offer me a kind of place where I could do arts and crafts and agriculture and forestry and all sorts of interesting things. A lot of the time I spent outdoors, for example. So it was a wonderful place from that point of view. Then I had a very good friend, and he and I noticed that coming into what you and I would call the sixth form, in other words, the period of the school where they do A-levels, there was this new intake, and amongst the new intake was this charming young woman. He and I said we would like to see if we could have a date with her, and so we tossed. Yeah, well, not together. We tossed it. That would have been. She would have been quite right in refusing both of us. We tossed a coin, and he won. So it was his lucky opportunity to ask her out first, see if she accepted. But I cheated on him.
Love it.
So I nipped around his back and basically asked her out first.
Wow.
Yeah, and interestingly, he wasn't happy about that at all.
I wonder why.
It tested our friendship. But I was lucky in that she accepted, and we sort of started like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've seen, the love that both of you have, and I think it's an incredible testament. And I've asked you many times about marriage advice and all of that stuff. So I'm very glad that you darted around him. It was a good choice. And
Giselle always says it's a testament to our stupidity.
And you mentioned that was kind of when you had a lot of outdoor time. You did a bit of gardening and so on. Is that so? Kind of connect that to Thrive, how you started, and perhaps just your approach to well-being, right? Because I feel there were elements of that probably started there.
Yes, I think you're right. There's a very important person then that comes into play at this point, and it would be wrong not to mention him at this stage. But by this time, I was in the school holidays. I was being invited to Giselle's home because, of course, my parents were living overseas, and so I was going back to their farm, and so that's an important feature of this. I didn't know anything about farming at all, and so the man in question, who I think in some ways was a kind of father figure for me, was a gentleman called Theo Sanger, or Theodore Sanger, and he was Giselle's stepfather, and he and Giselle's adopted mother lived in the farm, and they were farming blackcurrants, and at that time they were in Herefordshire, so they were farming apples, and it was a big mixed farm, and it was a lovely place to go and be. And so that was the first time, I think, for a long time, where I felt that I could be safe, where I could be, in that. We understand that phrase now in the context of well-being, and that very small word, be. But in those days, it would have been we would have had to find another vocabulary, I suppose. We might have said, "Oh, it's very relaxing here," or something like that. But that was certainly very important. I learned to drive a tractor, for example, amazingly as it may sound now. And driving a tractor forwards with a wagon is one thing. Driving it backwards with a wagon is quite another thing. And so that was, it's all part of that journey that I undertook. Theo was extremely kind. He was a wonderful example of what a kind, gentle human being can be, whilst at the same time leading a very successful and productive life, And so that, now that I look back at the age of 75, I can really see what an important person he was in my life, Of course, in those days, I didn't care. I was a young guy, right? I hadn't even reached the age of 20 when I first started to know him.
Yeah.
So, of course, in those early days, you don't kind of see it that way,
Yeah.
but you, of course, feel the benefit of it.
Mm.
And then later, as we got to know each other well, we became great friends.
And this safety that you felt with him, is that it feels like that is what has, translated into some of the work that you've done.
Exactly so. I think that's on the button. It was a safety that I felt with Giselle in a personal context, wherever we were or are, and then it became a feeling of safety with Theo, and his ideas, and then when we sat down to talk about Thrive for the first time, and Thrive came up a little later in my life, which we can come back to. So just jumping for a second, the important thing really is that he actually sat down with me and we designed the concept of Thrive together. And he was a proper botanist. He was a well-qualified botanist. He was a very good horticulturalist. He was always out in his garden or on the grounds or in the farm, doing something. He was never still. And so he brought the kind of gardening, horticultural, practical side to the idea. And I, by that time, was bringing the love of people, my concern for people who were lonely or disabled or whatever it was. Just to remind you, we had, of course, Giselle and I had volunteered and gone to Zambia in between those early days when we were at school together and then coming out of school. And then in those days, we were allowed to go on voluntary service overseas before graduating. So we were pre-graduates in that sense.
Yeah.
And so we were away in Zambia teaching. I was teaching agricultural science. And she was teaching English. And we did that for a year and a bit. And that, of course, taught us a huge amount to be as a couple, actually, apart from anything else. But also, of course, it taught us a huge amount about Africa and Zambia in particular, and development, of course.
And there was an incident that happened there which kind of sparked your, I guess, work with mental health, right, Chris? If you don't mind.
Yes, exactly so, in a very direct way. Giselle and I went on holiday with two friends, Chris and Teg, we were in Zambia, to Malawi, and we went to Lilongwe, in fact, the capital. And Giselle said to me, "Do you know what? I think I'm pregnant." And this was by the way, just in case you ask, this was a planned pregnancy. And I said, "Oh, great! Let's see if we can get a test." So we went to the hospital, and it was a big old hospital and people cooking for their patients who were inside, their relatives. So little fires around and all sorts. It was a huge hospital, and we asked the way to the laboratory, and we went there. And the laboratory was like a small cupboard. It was so small compared to the huge responsibilities they had.
Mm.
But they made us very welcome. That lovely Malawian welcome, very gracious and shaking of hands and so on. And then we said, would they mind if we asked them to do a test on Giselle's urine? And so they agreed immediately. It was very sweet of them. They had so many other things to do. So they did the test. And then we had this marvelous moment. The head of the laboratory came out and he was pointing at the test and he was saying, "Oh, there's something growing here." And so it was his way of congratulating us.
Beautiful. Mm.
So everybody jumped off their lab stools and shook our hands and so on and so forth. And then we went outside. And at that point, we were so sort of dizzy with the idea and so happy that we got lost in the hospital. It was a big hospital with lots of corridors and so on.
Mm.
And then finally, we got to a place where there were children poking sticks inside a cage. And we could hear screams. And we suddenly, the reality, the sort of reshaped itself. The bubble was pricked, and we suddenly realized that this was 5 men, as it turns out, men with mental disability, who were locked up in this big cage, going nowhere fast, and they were being bullied or teased by this children. So we told the children to go away. They did, but I felt very vulnerable in the sense that I didn't know what else to do at that stage. And so we left the compound of the hospital feeling both overjoyed and also quite shocked, quite shocked by it. The baby, the subsequent child that was born, is now our eldest daughter, our eldest child, and she's now in her young 50s. So, life has gone on. And we were able to do something about it eventually, but not, of course, about those specific individuals.
Mm. What a day to have those two experiences literally at the same time.
I know. It's interesting, isn't it, how it happens sometimes?
Yeah. Oof. And I mean, a lot of people in the mental health space, including myself, I think, yours is an extreme, like one of those cases, right? But there are so many of us who kind of start our work, whether it's in the mental health space or in other spaces, mainly from personal experiences. And I think it kind of shapes a lot of, how we do stuff, just our drive. And yeah, I just want to note that because that vulnerability that you spoke of, I feel I connect to it a lot.
Yes.
And I know a lot of others do as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
So connect that back to how it shaped your approach to community mental health, and then we'll kind of come back to the main topic of the conversation. Yeah.
Well, by that time I'd had that shock, and I was beginning to realize that there were people that needed, care, or they needed our protection, or whatever it was at the moment. Meanwhile, back in the school in Zambia, it was a big boarding school in a rural area, in a town called Samfia, which is on Lake Bangweulu. And there, of course, I began to learn the rudiments of community development, because not only were we teaching in the school, but we had an agricultural and farming community around us. And it was very important in a way to bring, which was an idea I had, was we had a young farmers club, and we brought in people from the surrounding areas who were basically subsistence farmers, but they were really skilled subsistence farmers, And so they taught us, me and the children that I was teaching, they taught us as much as we taught the children. So so that whole idea of community development, extension work, the way in which you should listen to people who have been on the land and who are very much more expert than you in many ways. All of that started to sort of, in a confusing and jumbled way, it wasn't all sort of smooth, but it started to be in my intake, in my thinking. And I met people along the way as well who kind of helped that and jolted me. And of course, from time to time, I was still pretty young then. From time to time, reminded me that arrogance was not a very helpful component of the mix, and that I had to listen. And I, luckily I learned to do that. So all of that then mixes up into the possibility of creating something a bit later on.
Yeah, I mean, here we're talking about mental health, right? But if I had to just connect the dots of everything that you've said so far, this could be for anyone, whether you're starting something up, you're being a mentor to someone, you're managing someone. So if I had to just these words that came up, like kind of the safety, creating safety with others, the love and concern that you've had for people that you work with, the spark that you had when you were feeling vulnerable, what you spoke about when you listen to people, you deeply listen to people and kind of took that step back and realized that, wait, there are others who are experts. And that also shows a lot of deep level of respect, right? I mean, all of that, if I put that all together, it kind of comes beautifully into some of the work you do as a mentor right now. And I feel that's shaped who you are probably as a mentor, if I could say that.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. When a young person has the good fortune to learn about listening, in a sense, what you're learning about is you're learning about listening. In other words, you don't become a practitioner overnight, but you understand that your own voice is not necessarily the most interesting one in the room. And sometimes that was taught to me in a abrupt kind of way. And sometimes that came to me in a more gentle way. But that's the significance, I think. It's not that you become, I don't look back to those early days and think I was a practitioner of listening and therefore the fundamentals of well-being. I look back and realize that I had the privilege of learning about listening. And that's, and then of course it went on,
Yeah. Amazing. So if I could just come back to, about this topic, right? About the central theme, which is designing your life. Obviously, like you've said, some stages we probably just didn't design. It kind of just happened organically. We kind of learned from it. And I think I'd love to go a little deeper into that. Maybe, we've already talked a little bit about different stages in life. But perhaps, what's important about this topic for you at this moment, because you've just turned 75. I know there's a lot brewing. You're being intentional about many things. But why is this topic important to you? When what do you want to speak about?
Well, starting from where we have left the conversation, as it were, or using it as a platform, if you prefer.
Yeah, exactly.
There are definitely things that I would like to talk about or like to think about and have a conversation about. And you're a good person to have that conversation with. So, I mean, it is true that I then became, with the help of Theodore, you remember him, with the help of Theo, I was able to sit down once I'd returned from Zambia and once I'd done one or two other jobs, and by this time I've got to about the age of 29, around there. And I was able to sit down and start thinking about what an organization would look like. And at first, interestingly, I said, what I want to do is create an extension agency, the ones like I'd seen in Zambia. I want to create an extension agency for disabled people in the UK in horticulture. So it was all those sort of funny bits, as it were, all coming together. And so Thea would take me out to tea, very English kind of style, and we'd sit in the city of Bath, in the Roman amphitheater, with a little orchestra playing, and we would have this wonderful discussions. And he would allow me to become very excited and what nowadays would probably sound a bit highfalutin, you know. But it was in fact a creation process, which essentially can be summed up by, wouldn't it be great if, you know. And at that point, the organization had no structure to it, really, no framework. And of course, I didn't know about organizational frameworks in that first round of discussion. But eventually we got there with a lot of tutoring and what these days we would call mentoring from him. And mostly he did it actually by coaching. He asked questions which provoked me. And I was able to then continue to develop the ideas. And then eventually he introduced me to people. And so the enormous luck of this is that I didn't have a network at that point, not of any kind. I now have a large network, you know, but in those days it was a very small network. It was basically family and friends. But he introduced me to some of his friends, and that made an enormous difference. They again quizzed me, chiseled the idea further, and eventually I found myself in front of, you know, money men, and was able to then introduce the idea of horticulture, gardening, and so on for disabled persons and all the rest of it. And eventually we found a funder, a Quaker funder, who said, would I mind, the gentleman who was the director, said, would I mind writing that down? So that was my first introduction to report writing, which was to write him a letter. And it was such a gentle and sweet way of getting into all of this business that, of course, some of the people watching will no doubt be involved in. So I wrote him a letter and with a little budget and sent it off. And then about 5 months later, they wrote back and said they would like to fund the project. It was a 3-year application to start an organization which was called the Society for Horticultural Therapy and Rural Training. That was its original full name. And they thought that it was a very good idea. The trustees had looked at it and so on. But they only had one concern. So my heart dropped a bit reading that. They had one concern, which is that I hadn't asked for enough money. So then my heart went up again.
So always ask for more money than you need is a lesson.
Well, yes, or ask donors who are actually practical, you know, because they were completely right. I was about, in those days of that old money, I was about £3,500–4,000 out, and they filled it in, and they attached an initial check for 2,000, so I could start a bank account and all that. And then they asked me whether I was happy with their advice, and if so, they would send the rest. So they were a wonderful, gentle kind of funder, and actually very supportive, and helped me to then learn my trade, which was, of course, the trade of what we now call social entrepreneurship.
Go back to this question, Chris, because we started here and then we kind of digressed a little bit.
Yeah, Giselle told me not to digress, by the way.
That's okay. We've got her behind. Nothing. Never mind.
Got her best interests at heart.
Yeah, we started by talking about this. You've turned 75. What are you thinking about at this moment? Because that's why we're having this conversation.
So I'm thinking about, I am actually thinking about those rather detailed things that happened to us a long time ago. I'm thinking about the other charities or organizations that I then started, which you have referenced briefly.
Yeah.
But each one of them was an amazing journey and, took a variety of different numbers of years, depending which one it is. And so now I'm looking back at this and I'm thinking a couple of things. One is, what can I do next? You know, and what can I do next definitely involves about half my time mentoring. So there's a big pivot there in my view, which is a pivot from doing in the really practical sense. You know, it's a pivot from doing to helping others to do, and to helping them to think through the issues that they're coming across as they start organizations and so on. So that's extremely satisfying, and I sort of fell into it by mistake. The whole question of mentoring. It was in about the year 2000 or around there when I started to mentor, and at that time the practice was very small because I was doing it very much part time. When I could, but it's developed and developed now, and now I have a great customer base, both people who have been mentored by me and people who are still waiting to be mentored. There's a bit of a waiting
list.
Yes, a little bit. So that's definitely something to be able to continue to contribute to the community of social entrepreneurs, social innovators, is, I think, really special, and I feel privileged to be able to do that, lucky to be able to do that at the age of 75. And it also means, of course, that I can use some of the skills that we've already referenced, that we've talked about in the earlier part of our discussion. And the other part of it is, today actually happens to be a highly auspicious day, by the way, not only because I'm talking to you, Daniel, which of course would have been auspicious enough, but also because my younger brother's eldest son has just had his second child. And so the family as a whole, through the WhatsApp system and everything else, is celebrating the birth of this new child. And when you get to 75, you have a number of years left. You don't know how many there are. In some cases, some people do know, but I don't. And so to have a child born into your family is extremely relevant, it seems to me. And because you begin to think, and I've thought this for some time really, you begin to think that you are part of a wheel that goes round, and that your life will end at some point and other lives begin. And in some cases, there are even lives within your own immediate family estate. So that in itself is a consoling and calming feeling, which I think is very important. And it's characterized, interestingly, by one thing which I've noticed in myself, which is that I don't like to leave home so much. Now, you and I, luckily, by virtue of the video, we're able to talk to each other, you in India, me in the south of England. So it's not that I am closed off from people in that sense, but I like to stay at home more and to, as it were, run my life from home rather than run my life outside of home. But that isn't completely true. Once I've got out of the house and I've then got to the destination, I'm then quite happy.
You enjoy yourself.
Yes, I can enjoy myself very much, and I look forward to that. But it's an interesting thing about getting older, that you are more thoughtful about travel, especially long distance travel. And that may be partly in my case, Daniel, because my stepfather, Malcolm, left at one point to go on a business trip to Hong Kong, and that's where he died. And so with my two brothers, Mike and Johnny, we then arranged for him to be brought back, and we buried him where he had his house in Corsica.
Oh, wow.
So there is possibly, a kind of reverberation in the back of my mind about those possibilities. And does it matter? It sort of matters.
Yeah.
So, that's some of the things that I'm thinking about.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I can only imagine that, right? It might just be at the back of your head. You may not be conscious, but it's kind of there every time.
Yes, exactly.
I want to come back to the wheel of life because I think that's really important. Firstly, congratulations. And you spoke about one side of it, which is calming and beautiful, and kind of you seeing the cycle of life. If I could ask the other side, is it scary? Is it difficult? What's challenging for you to, see the other side of the circle of life?
You see, I'm blessed at the moment with pretty good health. Every day I go for quite a long walk. I have a personal trainer who makes me bend myself around, and probably makes me look like a real idiot. But generally, there are, with one or two minor issues, I'm in pretty good health, pretty good shape. So I'm speaking to you from that position. And so therefore I enjoy life. I enjoy my grandchildren. I enjoy the mentoring. I enjoy being the chief executive of the Elders Council for Social Entrepreneurs. All of these things I enjoy. I enjoy being the chairman of the Mental Health Collaboration for Catalyst 2030. And so if you think about the dark side, as you have put it, or the side where your death may be more imminent, at this moment, I feel sorry that I might not do all those things. It's very simple in a way. It's not a very complicated regret. It's just that I would stop doing or being with all of those people and doing all of those things. I can imagine as I get older, and if I become ill in some way or another, that may change, and that may be part of the eternal design of things, referring to your point about design. It may be that is what then brings you to a realization that at some point things have to stop. But at the moment, I'm not, as you can tell, I'm not unmindful. So in a sense, the important thing is, seize the day, seize every minute, and enjoy it. Giselle is very wise in these respects. She says to me, when I say to her, "Oh, I've been invited to be a trustee of such and such," which happened the other day, she says always the same thing. She says, "Do you think you'll enjoy it?" And if I look a bit doubtful, then she'll say, "Well, don't do it then." It's kind of like, why didn't I think of that myself? And and if I say yes, I think I'll enjoy it, she says, "Well, do it." And then it's like, well, why didn't I think of that myself?
I think we've talked about this many times, but our wives and our partners are so much wiser than us.
Well,
God bless them. God knows where we would be if not for them.
Well, I'm sure Shrutika is much wiser than me, that's for sure, and probably much wiser than you. That's no doubt about it. But
no doubt about that.
Yeah.
So you've been thoughtful about travel. You're enjoying family, mentoring, just your professional life, and I think that's something I don't know how it is in that side of the world, but just having that professional life, like kicking and alive, even at this age is so important, isn't it? Because
that's an important point to make, which perhaps I neglected to make, which is that, of course, many people of my age have retired, quite a long time ago, and they've retired. Some of them are really using their lives productively, and it's just another way of working, really, and some people do seem to then get a bit lonely, actually, or the retirement goes wrong in some way or another. So in my case, I think I'm lucky to be in a situation where people need me. And that's probably a very important part of the equation, to be needed for your support, advice, chairmanship. Sometimes people call it wisdom. To be needed for those things can be very nourishing, I think. And to have the power and the ability to have, some time to oneself if one wants it. So it's an interesting combination, I think.
Say more about that, the power of having time for yourself.
Well, it is true that every day I go for a walk, and it's true that during that time I regard it as private time in a way, or my own time, and therefore I kind of spend that time. It's like a currency. I spend it in different ways. So I might listen to a book on the earphones. I might also just travel in silence, And I think the silence, which of course evokes the idea of stillness and chaos, the silence is a very important part of growing up. And and I think I am growing up a bit now that I'm 75.
Yeah. And you mentioned this earlier, right? Because I feel a lot of us, I still do this, but I can see how when I was a little younger, my voice used to always be the loudest voice in the room. And, kind of, I know it probably still is, but still. But I'm just coming back to this, right? So you talked about at this moment, this the joy of doing what you're doing. It also helps because you're feeling you have the need. You are needed by others. You have the power of having time to yourself. Time is a currency. That's very powerful, as you said. Your health is supremely important to you. I know how much time you spend on that. If you had to, speak to someone like me or someone, whoever's thinking intentionally about their life, what might you say, given that you've lived a very rich life?
I think it's partly a question of you see, you and I have we've been pretty good on this particular conversation today, but you and I often spend quite a lot of time just giggling, so you're one of those people who laugh at my terrible jokes, which is an incredibly satisfying thing.
And right back at you, yeah.
Yes, of course. And so to enjoy your life, it's just another way of saying it, to enjoy your life, it seems to me to be really important, And I used to enjoy much more than I do now. As I said to you, I used to enjoy heading off, to start a new project in another part of the world with basic needs or action on disability and development, going to Zimbabwe or Thailand or, Laos or whatever it may be. And now I really enjoy people coming into my home via one of the platforms, Zoom or whatever it may be, and us actually spending quite important quality time. It's so interesting that you can develop one-to-one on a reasonably stable platform. You can develop real synergy, which has been a surprise to me, but you can do it. And so I enjoy that relationship with a person or people, and that probably is quintessentially tied to enjoy your life. And if you can enjoy your life and enjoy being with people and enjoy being with yourself, alone with yourself but not lonely, which is a very different and rather corrosive feeling, then I think that's a sort of starter for 10. It's not everything. but it's not a bad place to start.
Yeah, and also kind of what's coming to me is, seasons of life, right? Each season of life is kind of different, and you might need different things. And asking yourself good questions about what you really need, what do you really enjoy, who are the people you want to spend time with, and probably having wise people like our partners and our mentors and so on is really important. And I think, I mean, I've had a couple of different seasons, and I can see how different it is. So
Yes.
sometimes when you say, what do you want to do 5 years from now, I now say, what, I don't know, because I'll be in a probably different season of my life, and that's okay as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the moment, you and Ritika are still bringing up a little one, and that makes a big difference also. That when you talk about seasons of life, whether you are immediately caring for somebody else, makes an enormous difference, it seems to me. I had the privilege of being the chairman of Carers Worldwide, an organization started by Anil and Ruth Patil.
Yeah.
And that brought home to me the significance of being a carer. And of course, at a more modest and a more natural kind of way, being a parent is one thing, and you and Shrutika are definitely being parents at the moment. Giselle and I are now graduating to grandparenthood. It's a different thing. Our eldest grandchild is now in his young 20s. And we learn about the world through him sometimes, which is also very interesting. And I realized quite quickly, as my grandchildren are growing up, and they tell you about the world, right? They tell you about what is happening out there. And you could do something like, you could say, no, it's not like that, it's like this. You could be kind of stuffy about it. But actually, the much more interesting thing is to know what they're knowing, to understand what they are, and to look into their being in that way. And that seems to me to be very important in the act of grandparenthood.
And parenthood. And if you can keep yourself, open to being with them, and open to their, because I feel I've learned so much about myself and found this joy and wonderment just by looking at my child's the way she looks at the world. I think has been huge for me. It brings me so much of joy. So totally.
Absolutely. You did mention when we were talking some time back, thinking about this broadcast, you did mention the question of legacy. And I wanted to say to you, and it particularly becomes more apparent as we have this discussion, I wanted to say to you that in one sense, it's quite impertinent of me to think about legacy. It's in a funny kind of way not my business. My business is to be the best person I can be, now, the best grandfather, the best friend to you, whatever is the right human scenario that we're working in or being in, the best mentor, whatever. The legacy seems to me to be someone else's job. I mean, the legacy about me, it needs to be somebody else's or other people's jobs. Yes, so I would love to continue doing what I do for as long as I am fit and healthy and interested and enjoy it. And then I would like to sit not in solitude particularly, but in quietness or just human exchange at a very modest level, family and so on. So I'm not necessarily asking for legacy in that rather overused way of thinking about it.
Yeah, hear that.
Of course, it would be lovely to be remembered by people, and I occasionally think of a person that I'm remembering. one mentor for me, and a lovely man, and someone who definitely deserves to be remembered for his kindness and support, was Joel Joffe. He was a provider of money for some of my projects, but that was the least of it. What he was really was a provider of friendship and care and guidance. Now, so when I mention his name, then his legacy then comes, with many more people having written about him and talked about him as well.
Yeah. I see you, I hear you, and I mean, you can view legacy in whatever way you want. And I totally agree, right? I mean, for me, there are two things. One is, yes, you live your life fully, you live your life as you should, and be a good human being, and do incredible stuff. And I think there's something about designing your life intentionally, right? Because from those two things can emerge some sort of a legacy, lightweight. Doesn't need to be this, I'm going to give you a medal at the end of your life sort of thing. But
it's a goodbye medal.
Goodbye medal. Only you and I can joke about this, Chris. Hope people are not who are here. Who, by the way, hi Chandrika. She says, "Hello, Chris." Chandrika, if you want to say anything more than "Hello, Chris," please do it now, because you're almost. But I mean, it's exactly what you said. How will people remember you? And that's, if that's the only thing we can talk about legacy, I feel, if you think about your life and what you mean to so many different people, you've already built a bloody good legacy, right? So I just want to say that to you, even though you may not, you may think that someone else has to build it for you. I feel you built it yourself very beautifully.
Well, going back to your point about intentionality, there's no doubt that once I'd learned how to create the first organization, I then intentionally created others. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to, make light of that, because it's an important part of what I've done. And so to that extent, of course, I fully accept what you're saying. But it's the pleasure of having worked with the teams that we developed in those days for each of those organizations, and indeed learning how to work with teams in the first place. So everything is, first of all, learning how to do it, and then you do it, and then you do it, better next time.
Yeah.
And that I think has been one of the things that I've really enjoyed about managing and running organizations, for example.
Yeah. And that's a doing thing, right? So yes, there is a huge part of your legacy that's that. And I think so many of us love you because of your presence and the way you are with us. And that's not a doing thing. That's just, just the way you are as a person. And that's a huge part of your legacy as well, which is not something small to, it is a big deal.
Is it the being part?
It is the being. It's a doing the being. No, man.
Doing being.
We're going to run over a couple of minutes if that's okay, but I just want to ask you a couple of questions which are really important. Firstly, maybe keep this for later, but what's your ambition for yourself at this moment, and what's the current challenge that you're dealing with?
Ambition at this moment is, there's a couple of things, interesting things. As you know, my father was a painter. In fact, one of his paintings is, as it were, behind my head, on the wall there.
Oh,
and my mother, and my mother was a writer. And I would like for their work to be better known. So my sister, from my father's side, Joanna, and I are in correspondence with a gallery in Australia, and we have great hopes that next year we'll be able to send a batch of paintings out there. And so it's about celebrating the life of one of the people in my family. And then my mother wrote about 15 novels published by John Murray.
Wow.
most of those novels have us as family members in them. So it's what these days is called faction. So it was partly fact and partly fiction. And I'm there called Christopher. She used to call me Christopher. And my first love affair is there, and all sorts of different things.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it would be fun to get them republished.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I want to continue.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I want to continue doing the things that you've already told people that I do. But I also want to make time in my life for these kind of things where we do something interesting and bring to the public's attention hard work, which was done in an artistic expression in this case.
Yeah. And that's a good example of building someone else's legacy. Thank you for that.
Yeah, it is. It's a very good point, actually. Yeah.
Gareth says that's a being thing. So
Yes. But,
well done, Gareth.
yeah, at least Gareth, it's not a bean thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Chandrika continues saying, I wish you could dwell more on the feeling of being needed. It sounds like feeling needed by a peer community is more crucial than feeling needed by family or friends.
Oh, it's a very interesting. Your apologies are fully accepted, by the way, Chandrika. For the, I'm not sure if one comes before the other, but there's no doubt at all that because of the slightly odd way in which I was brought up in the first 15 years of my life, there's no doubt that I had needs of wanting to be needed, loved, and so on. And so that has formed part of the way in which I think about, the organizations I've created and so on. And I certainly always felt very nourished and supported by the teams that we created. There's no question about that. I think equally, there's no question that I felt tremendously supported by Giselle and the family that she brought in from her side. And then, of course, my own family, my brothers and sister, and then my children, of course. So I think in the end, it becomes a kind of big, bowl into which, or crucible into which we can pour all of this. And I certainly have needed support from all of those people, as much as I hope I have provided them with what they may need.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful visual as well. You kind of, you can give as much as you have in your cup. So your cup needs to be full as well. And that's feeling needed is a big part of filling your cup. Amazing. If there are any last comments, reflections, appreciations, please send that now. But Chris, this is a question I ask all my guests in the end. But before that, I want to play a song for you. Is that okay?
Yeah, anything.
Awesome. Can you hear me?
Yeah, all too well.
Yeah, this is just my wish for you. It means a lot that you're doing this, not only this conversation, but you're just here, being there, doing what you do with all the love that you have for all of us. And for the time for each of us, this song is important, taking one day at a time. But for you especially, this is my wish for you. I'm only human. I'm just a man. Help me believe what I can be and all that I am. Show me the stairway I have to climb. Lord, for my sake, teach me to take day at a time. One day at a time, sweet Jesus, that's all I'm asking from you. Lord, give me the strength to do every day I have to do. Yesterday's gone, sweet Jesus, and tomorrow may never be mine. Lord, give me the strength, show me the way, one day at a time.
Hey,
I had to play a song for you finally after so many
thank you. Thank you for that. You had your eyes closed for the whole time.
Yeah, I
And,
was feeling it.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you. So it's one day at a time, but I was also thinking one step at a time. And, so it's a little bit of both.
Super. Thank you for being here. One last question, and then we're going to go.
So what does stillness in chaos mean to me, right? Well, I think it's partly that question that we've come to lately in the discussion of silence. So enjoying silence for its productive self, I think, is important. Referencing the word chaos, certainly the first 15 years of my life, there was quite a lot of that. And so managing chaos, important. So in the end, I have found a way of being still or silent sometimes in what is a chaotic world. And that's partly by the introspection that we've already talked about, but it's also partly by doing. So it's the opposite of the being.
Yeah.
Doing things which are productive for people and which help them to manage their lives better in the chaos, which is not of their making, mostly. It's not of their making. And so to me, that's very important, to have supported people to live a little better and a little more happily in the chaos is not a bad thing to do.
I love that. I don't think I've heard anyone put it the way you put it. You can be still, and the way you do it is by doing more for others and in service. And it so kind of sums up who you are as a person, Chris. I think that's beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. I've got a couple of comments here which we should leave you with. Thanks for the
leaves from my life, thoughts and mine. Thank you, Chandrika. Highly poetic. Much appreciated.
Rajiv, lovely to listen to you. You've always been inspirational and will always be an inspiration.
Thank you, Rajiv.
Agree. Rajiv, thank you for being here and seeing this. Chris, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and everything else.
Pleasure. Great pleasure.
Stay back for 2 minutes. And thank you everyone else for watching this. I've got another conversation happening next week around creating safe spaces and how do you generate hope from that, and speaking to someone who works in the social justice space, especially in juvenile homes. So would love for any of you to join that. Thank you again and have a good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Take care. Bye.
Bye.